All right, so while we're waiting for people to show up, we've got 10 minutes to wait, and I like to talk about the news in such times. This I thought was wonderful. Let's see if I can get it to actually show the page of interest instead of an ad. This is from, I think, a satellite. And let's see if there's any way. Here we go. All right. If there's any way to get around these ads, may or may not be. I was able to play this in a previous class. Good. Perhaps this ad will end. There we are. That's what we wanted. This, well, that's from the ground, which is nice. And I saw this in lightning strikes. But somewhere on this page, instead of all these stupid ads, it might be here, there was one that showed you this from a satellite, which was much more interesting. Nope, okay, I guess they've hidden it somewhere. Too bad. Anyway, the one from space is really very interesting, and it is quite shocking how much the United States has been set on fire by these lightning strikes. Anyway, so Facebook is largely responsible for the election of Donald Trump and the Brexit decision in Britain, and we'll talk more about that in the political part of this class later. The book Mindfuck is about that. Cambridge Analytica was Facebook allows you to purchase ads, and they allow you to carefully target them, and they do not care if you lie. They have no compunctions at all. They regard it as totally not their business to judge the accuracy of anything you send. And so this was used to suppress the vote and promote these things that many people did not want. And now Facebook has become so widely known that Facebook is selling access to voters to manipulate the political system, and that they have caused huge disasters in other nations as well as the United States, that they're beginning to feel like the people are so angry. Advertisers have boycotted them briefly, which didn't really hurt them much. And some politicians have been talking about regulating them. And my opinion is what really matters is they're afraid that a Democrat might win. And then they might actually do something to Facebook. So anyway, they're beginning to make tiny steps to make it appear that they've done something about this without actually doing anything. And this, I think, is the classic fake move to make it look like you've done something. They're talking about halting political advertising after Election Day to stop post-election misinformation, which is a sort of hilarious thing to do. What is the point of stopping misinformation after the election? Well, that way you can say you've done something, but you still had an opportunity to sell all the product before that. Anyway, it's an interesting matter of business to watch how they carefully avoid actually changing anything that matters and come up with something to do on the side. This is like the oil companies will donate $1 million to like plant trees in a park somewhere and say, there, we're good for the environment. You try to find some symbolic gesture to hopefully make your critics shut up without actually doing anything that would hurt you. Anyway, so one of the many ways in which the American government is a spectacular, we are living through amazing times. We're living through the collapse of the American empire in a really big way. And since the government has completely vanished and is not doing anything, school districts, towns, and states and counties are just randomly deciding when to open schools. There are no guidelines. The guidelines are withdrawn. CDC wrote guidelines months ago, but they were never published. Then when they leaked out, they modified them. So many schools are opening. And then they're finding, since they haven't controlled the spread of the virus at all, that of course a bunch of people are sick, and then it starts spreading, and then they have to close again. So it is just the kind of chaos you'd expect in a society with no functioning government, where people are just doing random things and nobody understands what the rules are, which is what we have. And this is one of the many things now, because as I'm sure you know, every time Trump talks, he says that the election is rigged, the votes are going to be altered, people are going to pull the ballots out of the mailboxes. So many people believe this, and they have started threatening their election administrators. So now the elections are run by pretty much volunteers and minor government functionaries all through the states, and now they all have to accept getting death threats, and from people who are convinced that they are responsible for all this rigging of the election. And this is not that different than the Pizzagate conspiracy a few years ago, when the people, the far right people, well, the QAnon's not exactly far right. This gang of people believed that cheese pizza is a slang term for child pornography, they said. And the different types of pizza refer to different types of child sex slaves. And they decided to go shoot up a pizza shop because they were sure that it was being used to victimize children, which was not true. But, you know, when you spread lies, they want to go through society like a disease, and they cause people to do foolish things. Here's another foolish thing. The University of Utah got infected by ransomware. They were able to recover their systems with backups, but they paid the ransom anyway because the criminals had stolen the data. And this is a fairly common belief these days. They think you can trust criminals. And if you pay the ransom and the criminals say, oh, then we won't dump the data, then they won't, and you can say you've solved the problem. This is sort of amazing and baffling to me. Obviously, they still have the data. They can just dump it later. They can lose it by accident. It is very strange to me that this would be considered to be useful. And certainly it poisons the well for everyone else, because now criminals have a working business model and they're incentivized to hack more people. But anyway, most people do in fact pay the ransom. My friends that work as consultants for large companies say you always just have to pay the ransom. Everybody knows it's a bad thing, but this is the tragedy of the commons, which is a big central theme in this course. There are many cases in which an individual can benefit by doing something that makes it worse for everybody. Like, you can just have a manufacturing plant, you can just dump your pollution in the drinking water, and then you can buy bottled water. And that way you'll have more money as long as you don't care about hurting other people. And this is paying the ransom to criminals is the same kind of thing. You might have less trouble, but now you have more criminals hacking more people. So this is what you need government for, and we don't have it anymore. Anyway, Lambda School, you might be interested. This is, people say there's going to be a big disruptor in the information technology space. I've heard this idea for a while, but now it's all online, which is what it has to be in America now, since we have done absolutely nothing to contain this virus. This is a virtual coding school where they train you, and you only pay after you get a job. Now, when you do get a job, you have to pay quite a bit, like 15 or 20% of your first year's salary, but that sounds like a pretty good deal. It turns out they're having real trouble actually making the funding work. It's not, I think what happens is it's hard to make people actually pay when they do get a job and such. But anyway, it sounds like a pretty interesting idea to me. Certainly, it would make sense if you don't have to pay anything unless you actually get a job from this training. I think that's quite reasonable. But they're apparently having trouble actually making a money-making business out of this. Anyway, so this is most of the data that travels any large distance in the world travels through single-mode fiber optic cables using a technique called dense wavelength division multiplexing. And I used to train people in fiber optics, and we talked about this and the physics of it. And you move many different colors of light through the same cable. And these people have developed a new way of moving even more colors at the same time. So they can now move 178 terabits per second through one strand of fiber optics. And this is extremely useful, because what it means is you can take fiber optics that have already been laid, for example, on undersea cables going 10,000 miles under the ocean. You can take those cables and you can now push more data through the existing cable without having to lay new cable. And that is much, much cheaper. Now, they talked about this. You will have to buy new transmitters and receivers for every 40 to 100 miles. So it wouldn't work for a cable that's already 10,000 miles under the ocean, but it would work all right for a cable where you can still go down a manhole or something every 40 to 100 kilometers and add new components. You have to put 16,000 pound purchase price components at each amplification stage, but that is a whole lot cheaper than laying more fiber to carry more data, which can cost up to £500,000 per kilometer. So anyway, that's a significant bit of progress. And I see we're up to 10 minutes after. So I think I'm just going to remove all of these and get down to the official class stuff. So here we are. This is CNIT 160. We're now in the second lecture. And we have maybe 30 students, and I see about 20 of them are doing quizzes online. So I guess a lot of them just don't choose to show up for the live lecture, which you do not have to do. You can view it in a video, or you can just read the book and do without the lecture. Those are successful ways to proceed. Anyway, so we're up to here. We're going to start talking about information security governance. And this is, at least for me, I found this pretty burdensome because I never have been a manager at a big corporation. I've dealt with small and medium businesses mostly, and I mostly did technical things. So the management stuff is all sort of foreign and alien to me. And so you have to learn a whole lot of terms, and most of them are hard for me to remember, but I'm trying to find some way to break it up into small chunks and make it as easy as possible. So we'll see if you like it. We'll see what you can do. But there's just an alphabet soup full of stuff to learn here. And these are the concepts of an information manager. So this chapter, I'm breaking it up into two pieces. And so the first part is the basics of security governance and monitoring and business models. And in the second part, we'll talk about these other topics, strategy objectives and risk objectives and so on. So governance is the point here. Governance is where you have management and you control your business. Now, a small business like a mom and pop restaurant, you often don't have a clear power structure or rules. There's just a boss telling people what to do. But when you reach a certain size, like usually around the time you incorporate and start selling stock, you have to have a whole bunch of layers of management. And the point is now you have plans of what's going on. And instead of having just a bunch of, if you're a startup, you'll start with just a bunch of rock stars that can do everything. But when you're a corporation, you make this giant machine where the people can be replaced. And they have well-defined job roles and well-defined training for each role. And they can just be replaced like the Army. You replace each person with a replaceable component and the whole machine keeps going. So you have to have all these control features in the management, policies, objectives, authority, and monitoring. And the point is, this makes sure that the business achieves its goals in an organized, repeatable, controllable way. So the point here is to control personnel management. You find out getting the right people and making sure they can do their job right, making sure you're monitoring them, that they are doing their job right, considering the source of your software and other components, managing risk, configuration, changes, and access, so you control what you have, how you update it, and how people use it. And you perform vulnerability management to limit the weak parts of your network, and incident management to deal with security incidents as they occur, and continuity planning so that when disasters occur, you can deal with them in an organized, efficient way. For example, ransomware, like we were just talking about that school district. If you get hit with ransomware, you should have a plan of how you're going to cope with it. And that's the plan. You have an organized business. So you want to monitor your processes. This is all these modern processes now have to deal with the fact that the world is changing really fast. You have constant changes in your customers, in the law, in the competitors, in the technology. So it's not enough to just have a working business. You have to have a feedback system where you make a plan, you implement the plan, you measure how well are we doing, and then you modify the plan to improve that, and you just keep going around and around the circle. This is the modern way. So here's how it looks. You start with a vision at the very top. At the very top, you have a general guiding principle of what we do here. Like Google said, their mission statement is, we are here to index all the world's information. So you have some global grand vision which explains what the point of your company is. Then you define strategies and objectives for the business, and then you define IT strategy, and then have security strategy and policy and standards and processes all down here. And then you measure security metrics. You measure, have we succeeded in accomplishing our goals? To what extent have we succeeded, and to what extent have we failed? And then that sends you feedback up here where you adjust all these other things, adjust all your strategies to improve. And that constant improvement loop is an essential feature of modern businesses at all levels. So objectives are the things you want to accomplish, achievable, measurable, end states you wish to achieve. We want to have these many customers. You want to have this much improvement, that sort of thing. Then you have strategies to achieve the objectives, and you have policies which specify your mission's objective and goals, and that helps you set priorities where you decide what part is important, what do we have to do right now, what can we put off until later. Then you have standards. These are just your standard procedures to do things, the brands of products you're going to use, the general procedures you're going to, then you have processes that come from those. And then you have controls. Controls make sure that people are doing things using the correct processes. You have programs and you have projects in your company and you have managers and that. This is where people get things like project management certification. And then you have metrics. You measure to see if you are achieving your goals or not. So let's try some Kahoots about that. I've got them open in another page someplace here. There they are. All right. So this is the first one. All right. All right. So go to kahoot.it and put in that number. A place to save these. All right. We got 5 people. We might have up to, oh, good, 6. That's pretty good. I'll give it about 10 seconds to see if we get one more. This may be it. All right, I guess that's it. All right. What part of the organization is at the top guiding all the activities? Okay, that's the vision, not the objectives. That comes below the vision. The vision is the grand principle of what we do here. Why does this company exist anyway? All right, and what part provides feedback to the other parts? Okay, that's metrics, where you measure, have you achieved your goals? And if not, what? Then from that, you plan how to come closer to achieving your goals. All right, what artifact specifies desired capabilities or end states? Those are objectives. All right. And what artifact drives a consistent approach to solving challenges? Those are standards. You have a standard way of doing things, and therefore things should be repeatable and easy to control, hopefully. So I've got Anthony. Kate will have to tell me who they are if they want their points. And BH will probably have to tell me who they are. My grader might be able to figure it out. if that's an initial. But anyway, you can put your real name in the chat if you want to get your points. Your cake. Good. Okay. I'll make the note of that. All right. Fair enough. So I'll leave this. Let's go back to here and try another section. All right. So the reason why you need governance is that everybody depends on information systems in the modern world. And so there are, of course, the three fundamental tenets of computer security: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality is, of course, making sure that only authorized people can read data. Integrity is making sure that only authorized people can modify data. And availability means that your systems are able to provide service to authorized users and not unavailable due to lack of capacity or some kind of attack or anything. Those are the three fundamental pillars of security. All right. And computer security is the state when you have an acceptable level of all three of these desirable things. All right, risk management is measuring the level of risk in your company and then taking appropriate follow-up actions to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. You improve your processes, you monitor your systems and detect events, security events, with things like Splunk and other tools. And then you have an incident response plan so that when you detect a security incident, you can have a response and deal with it. Like a fire department, putting out a fire to limit the damage it does. You have compliance laws and regulations, and you have a department in your company making sure that you are achieving compliance, or that you're at least reasonably close to achieving compliance, and you have a way to keep up with the changes and try to improve your compliance. People are rarely completely 100% compliant, but the more out of compliance you are, the more likely you're going to have consequences like lawsuits and punishments. You have plans for business continuity in the event of a disaster. And you have management from metrics, where you're controlling how you measure these things, and you're measuring the right things, and you're able to deal with it. You allocate your resources, your hardware and your human powered resources. And these are all the things you get. If you have proper good security governance, all these parts of your company work better. I've seen this happen. I probably mentioned this before. I had one of my students that worked as a compliance officer at a company, and they were just beginning to meet their first compliance standard, and they got hacked before that happened. And they were pretty much unable to recover from that, because if you actually meet a compliance standard, that means you're organized and you have plans and you have processes for these things. And then when you get hacked, you're in a much better position to respond to it. So you have to align with your guiding principle, the mission of the company, your goals and objectives, and your strategy. You have to make sure that your security program fits in the company and helps it achieve its goals. One very common mistake is your security team is out of touch with the company, and they pass a bunch of rules trying to make it more secure, which in fact get in the way of business, and that's not going to work. You have to help the business succeed. You can't just force security to go up to some perfect state that you think is good. You have to help the business get better. This is sort of like a doctor trying to help a person get better. They show up with diseases, and you can say, well, you should totally reform your whole life and live a perfect life. That's not productive. Instead, you'll say, you better do these simple things that you can do, that you will accept. Anyway, so here's the things that define your organization, things like culture, the assets you have, how much risk you're willing to tolerate, what your legal obligations are, and what the market conditions are. All these things affect your company's security decisions. One common mistake in security is to be Dr. No, where you just tell people they can't do this. You can't be a local administrator. You can't use Internet Explorer. You have to use two-factor authentication everywhere. And then, of course, what people do is they can't obey those rules and get their job done. So they start sneaking around and putting things on unauthorized servers and opening third-party home versions of software that doesn't have your stupid restrictions in it. And that's shadow IT, where now you're not even in control of anything, because people are not even using the official company resources to do the company processes. So that's what happens when you try to be too strict. So you have a risk appetite at your company. You've decided how much risk you can accept. Facebook is famous for accepting a lot of risk. Their whole philosophy is move fast and break things. What if you weren't afraid? And that's their philosophy, is just rush everything out, get the new features out really fast. Don't worry about the consequences. And that has made them extremely rich and extremely successful. And now, as I mentioned in the news, we're reaching a point where some people are beginning to say Facebook has done too many wrong things, gone too fast, and they need to sort of grow up and be more mature and careful in their actions. And that's one possibility, but there's not much sign of it happening. So you have roles in your company, people like an auditor, a systems engineer, accounts receivable manager. These are people who you need to know your role in a big company, and there's a lot of them. So you have, as far as management goes, you have supervisors of teams, and then managers and directors, vice presidents, and then finally the president. And then at the top, the chief executive officer is the one responsible for making decisions of how the company moves. But above that is the board of directors and the chairman of the board of directors, which represent the investors in American corporations. And the board of directors appoint the chief executive officer, and you can be thrown out. And this happened to Steve Jobs at Apple. He made drastically wrong decisions about the direction of the company, like putting out the Lisa computer. And it was so bad that they threw him out of his own company. He was the founder and made the company, but the board of directors threw him out. He eventually came back, but because of that, when Mark Zuckerberg founded Facebook, he changed the rules so the board of directors can never fire him. So Facebook is a dictatorship. Mark Zuckerberg is the permanent dictator forever, and nothing can change about Facebook's policies without convincing Mark Zuckerberg to do it. And you can't fire him either. So it's an interesting issue. Now that a lot of people are angry at Facebook, they are discovering that we have no leverage to control Facebook. We might be able to do something with antitrust law, but there's certainly none of the normal pressures can move Facebook. Anyway, so you have responsibilities at your company, specific ones you have to do, like monthly corporate expenses, and then general responsibilities that everybody has, like obeying your information security policy and your ethics policy. So to define what people can do, one common technique is the RACI chart. And this indicates who should be involved in making decisions. So if you're requesting a user account, the person responsible for this, the end user, has to request it. The manager is accountable for that. They are one who can be, whose responsibility is to make sure it gets done. There are people who are consulted and people who are informed of the decision. You can think of this as like an email. The end user would email this person directly, and questions would go to this person, and these people would be CC'd. They're just supposed to know that it's happened and not have anything to do with actually deciding whether it should happen or implementing it, but they're informed because they might want to have an indirect effect, like changing a policy, saying too many people are doing this, we need to change a policy. So this is the RACI. And you've got various charts, so you can have these things and all these different people in your company, and then you can say, here's the person responsible, here's the person accountable, these people are informed of it, and the C is the consulted. These are the people who might be consulted about the best way to do it. All right, so you consider all these things. Your skill level matters. Segregation of duties is very important. That's why you have so many people involved, so that an individual person cannot decide to do something and just rush off and do it. They have to get permission from people. And this is what makes the classic bureaucratic thing that Dilbert is all about, and people get frustrated. I'm just trying to do something. I need to be a local administrator, but I can't. And then when I ask, I have to ask this person, they have to ask that person, and they have to have a meeting, and I have to wait until next week. And I hate this. And Facebook is the ultimate rebel. They totally got fed up with all this. And they said, just move fast and break things. Everybody can just do anything they want. Let's just, a developer who has a new idea should be able to just write that code and push it out without having to wait for approval from anybody. That's the other way to do it. Low friction, fast, agile. That's another way to go. But the corporates that are well managed don't have any of that. They have all these controls at every level. All right, another issue is conflict of interest, of course. The reason why you are managed by people is because you might be doing something bad, and you might have an incentive to do something bad that's going to cause a negative effect. And that's why you should have management above you. You shouldn't be allowed to make a dangerous, important decision alone. You should have to get approval for that, because that's the plan. That segregation of duties means two people have to agree to get something done, and conflict of interest means you're not allowed to do something to benefit yourself. You don't have the authority to just raise your pay, for example. Someone else would do that. So let's take a look at the next cahoots, which are 2A1. This looks right. All right, and I see BH has told me who they are. I'll make a note of that. We had 6 last time. We might get 6 this time. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right, I think we're down to 5. All right, so all right, so if you have a DDoS attack and your servers are down, what has gone wrong? Okay, that's a failure of availability. All right. All right, which one of these is the most important aspect of security? That's the point. You have to customize it in your business. If you're handling military secrets, then confidentiality is the most important. If you're setting up some kind of public game that everybody should be able to use, or like Facebook, then probably availability is the most important. You have to balance these things and adjust it for your business. All right, what's the A in RACI? All right, that's accountable. All right. All right, and what principle prevents an asset owner from controlling her own access permissions? That's a conflict of interest. You shouldn't have something valuable and also control your own permissions for it. You should have to ask somebody else for permission. So the winners, BH has won twice, all right. And Vu has won, okay. I think Vu is a real name. And B and D will have to tell me who they are if they want their points. All right. Oh, okay, I see. Good, I've got it. I see you in the chat. Good. All right. So let's move to the next bit here. All right, so you got the board of directors. They have a fiduciary duty. They're responsible to the people who have bought stock. Those are the shareholders, and their obligation is to maximize shareholder value. So they represent the investors, and they appoint the CEO. So there are principles from the National Association of Corporate Directors that people should be including cybersecurity now and consider it at every level. You should be discussing cyber risk and considering and including it in your decisions. Executive management carries out directives. And as far as IT is concerned, it's typically controlled by someone called a CIO or a CTO or a CISO. Different companies are organized differently, but if they have a top security executive or an IT director, it would be in that type. And almost everybody has a technology executive because technology is central to all businesses. Many of them do not, in fact, have a chief information security officer, indicating that they don't take security very seriously. All right, so you have executive management that has ultimate responsibility for setting the policy and demonstrating it. I was quite amazed to observe that McDonald's fired their CEO for having inappropriate sexual relationships at the company. And it is, I think, very surprising for a person to be punished in such a severe way in modern America. It reflects quite a change in our culture brought about by, say, the Me Too movement, where we take that sort of thing far more seriously than we used to. So you have a steering committee that decides how your security is going to be handled, risk treatment recommendation, risk assessments, considering your laws, regulations, and requirements, and your security incidents. And so then you have business processes and business asset owners. These are people who are typically non-technical, and they handle how your business runs and how the assets are protected and used. And then there are custodians. Custodians are not just the people with brooms that clean the place. They are the people who manage a system. So there might be a custodian of a server, and they have a administrator above them controlling what they do, but their job is to actually do the job for the owner. So the asset owner is responsible for making sure that the asset is protected. For example, you have a database full of customer social security numbers and addresses and credit card numbers. And that is an asset. So someone's responsible for owning that, but they have a custodian who actually manages the database and performs the queries and sets up the forms. That's the person who actually does the work. But the owner is responsible for making sure that that asset is being correctly protected and correctly used. The owner is often uninformed and uninvolved in the details of what the custodian does, but they're ultimately responsible for it. And so you get bizarre situations like this. Equifax got hacked, but the CEO said, "It's not my fault. Some IT guy didn't put on the patch." And of course, he can try saying that, but it isn't going to fly in court, because you can outsource work, but you cannot outsource responsibility. The fact is, the executives are responsible for what really happens at the company. Even if somebody else makes a mistake, the executive will be asked, why did you hire that person? Why did you not train that person? Why was that person not supervised? Why was that work not reviewed? It is your responsibility to make a process so that you control your company and you don't let bad things like that happen. And if bad things are happening, then it is your failure as a top executive for not setting in proper processes to make sure that those bad things don't happen at the bottom. You are answerable for what really happens. And you can't just blame it on your employees, because you're responsible for those employees. Now, you can fire those employees and punish them, and that would be normal business, but you can't say that they're responsible for the ultimate consequences of their bad actions. You're responsible for making a poor system that allowed those bad actions to happen. Anyway, so the CISO, if you have one, this indicates a serious commitment to security, and this is a top officer that answers to the C-suite of the company, and therefore you take security seriously. So they report right up to the chief operating officer and chief executive officer, which is very nice. If you don't have one of these, then apparently security is not considered an essential part of your business, but a more detailed thing. And the rank of the person handling security at your company determines how seriously you take security. So it might be a security manager or a security director or a vice president or CISO. As you move higher and higher in power, it indicates a larger and larger commitment to actually securing things. I know Twitter had no chief security officer until after they got hacked badly, and then they hired their first one. It is a step in maturity of your company from a viewpoint of security as you begin to have higher executives and eventually a chief security officer. You may have a privacy officer just to watch the privacy of your customer data. This is a big idea, especially with these modern compliance regulations, especially the California privacy regulation and the European one that just passed, that are really quite strict. Many people have greatly had to improve their privacy game to meet these new regulations. Your software development has a bunch of executives on the team here, and your data management has a bunch of similar executives at different levels working on it, and your network and your systems, all these layers of hierarchy, and your operations, And your security operations are just the same. You've got an architect designing systems, an engineer at a lower level, an analyst way down here, typically beginning security employees that take classes in our more technical side mostly, although possibly this one, like you get a City College certificate, and your first job is often as an analyst, where you stay up late at night watching logs on something like Splunk, and you're just watching for like the events. And if you see one of the top 10 most common events, you know what to do. And other than that, you have to escalate them to a higher level. This is where you often start out in the business. All right. And then you got auditors. Auditors, I'm hoping to have a CISA class, which is the auditing certification at City College soon, but it hasn't happened yet. And right now with the current budget crisis, I guess it won't happen anytime soon. But auditing is a big issue. The person that audits your systems to see if you are meeting compliance and to see if you're meeting your goals. And then you got the service desk, of course, helping everybody from the end users to the executives to everybody. And quality assurance, a similar issue, making sure that your products and the products you buy have sufficient quality. Everybody on your staff has to have these general features where they accept acceptable use policies. They're only allowed to do certain things with the company computers and the company data, and they're expected to exercise reasonable judgment and not take unreasonable risks and do foolish things. And they're supposed to report security problems and incidents to management. So there are monitoring systems where you measure to see what people are doing. So you have to have controls and an internal audit. You have performance evaluation of your people. You have 360-degree feedback where people above them, the people to the side, and the people below them all have a chance to say how this person's actions have affected them. And you have position benchmarking where you consider your business, your layers of management, and compare it to similar companies to see. For example, you might notice that we're the only company in this business sector of this size that doesn't have a chief security officer. Maybe we should think about that. And all right, so then you've got various ways to organize this. There are metrics. There's technical metrics from your firewall and so on, how many events, and there's business metrics, risk indicators, goal indicators, and performance indicators, where you measure your success. One of the big problems in this business is that it's hard to define how much money you make by being more secure. It is not like other things. If you have another plan, like I'm going to open another factory or have an advertising campaign, you can clearly define how much it costs, and you can generally reasonably estimate how much money we'll make by doing that, so you can decide if it's worth doing. But if you say, I want to have a new security executive and issue a new security plan and buy these expensive security products and implement them, that we can see that's going to cost a lot of money, but how much money is that going to make us? It's just a cost with no apparent return on the investment. So it's a problem. Because you'd like to say, well, we won't get hacked, and we would have got hacked, and that would have been a huge loss. But you really can't prove that you prevented that hack, and you really can't prove that you would have gotten hacked. So you just try to scare people. So there are other ways to do it. Fiduciary responsibility, where you say you're protecting the wealth of the shareholders, you're meeting regulations, you're meeting the standards of your business, doing what other people do. Those are what people do to justify it. So SMART metrics are desirable metrics where they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. If you can have that kind of measurement, then it's the most helpful. And so you'd like to have leading indicators, if you can find them, that predict future risk. You want to have a causal relationship to a business impact. And it'd be nice if your metrics can actually influence decision-making. This is a fundamental problem of top management, is that you really don't have the information you need, and yet you have to make decisions. So let's take a look at some Kahoots about that. I see we're right on time here. This is 2A2, which is here. Okay. good. I think that's it. 1, 2, 3. That's as many as we can have, so we can go. All right. All right. So who has a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders? That's the board of directors. So if the chief executive officer is making decisions that lower the stock value and fail to provide returns to the shareholders, then they kick them out, like they did to Steve Jobs. All right, what process compares job titles with other companies? That's benchmarking. All right, who appoints the CEO? That's the board of directors. Corporations are not democracies exactly. Or to be fair, they're sort of democracies, but the owners are the shareholders, not the employees. That's why a few companies make a big deal about being employee owned, like Starbucks claims this, to try to suggest that they have a different flow of power in the organization. All right, what's the T in SMART? That's timely. All right. So let me get my least record winner is BH. There's one every time. Very good. And metrics, you'll have to tell me who they are. And VU. I know who VU is. Okay. All right. Good. And I see who's metrics. Good. Okay. So I'll put that on the right score. All right. Good. All right. So there's one more section to go to. So risk management. The point of risk management is to lower your security incidents and help respond to them, help reduce the time it takes to detect and respond to these, and measure your performance almost entirely by time. How quickly do you detect security problems and fix them? Time to create accounts, time to discover vulnerabilities. These are measurements of how effective your program is. So you can have convergence metrics where you consider how soon you fix problems, like gaps in what you should have to what you do have. And you have value delivery metrics. So you can see what percentage of controls are effective, how much your program costs compared to other things like population and asset value and so on. These are many ways to measure the success of your program. You've got resource management metrics where you consider the standardization of your processes and how many of your assets are controlled by security controls. Last time we talked about the attack matrix, where you have these hundreds of little squares in a grid, and some people color them green and say we're currently covering 10 squares, so if we got up to 20 squares, that would be better. And there are many people trying to develop those little grids that would help you. So here's one way to do it with the security balance scoreboard. You've got financial, customer, internal processes, and innovation and learning as parts of your company. And then you have vulnerability management and compliance and so on. And here's a measurement of all the good things you should be doing. And you can now have a scorecard of to what extent you are doing all those things. This is one of the more difficult things about security management, is that it very rapidly turns into just a gigantic grid of hundreds of things you're supposed to do. And at first it seems overwhelming. And I sort of avoided it for a few years, but I'm gradually accepting it and getting used to it. This is what it really is. There are just many things you need to do, and you can't possibly do them all, but you have to somehow measure how well are we doing and how do we do better. So the BMIS model is one of these. You have your organization, you have people, you have technology, and you have processes. And then you connect these. So the organization is connected to the people by culture. That is your idea of what it's like to work here and what we do here. And it's connected to technology by your architecture, and it's connected to your processes by governing, and so on. You've got these are called the elements of the company, these 4 circles. And then you have the things that connect the elements. This is one way to organize your thinking. So you think of all the things that are happening in security management at your company and in general management of the company, and how we're going to address them. And we'll see some examples later of how this might help you identify problems and fix them. So the culture is the pattern of behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes at your company. This is a very real thing. It's not mathematical, but it's real. I know I've seen it myself in morale of a class. And we used to have face-to-face classes and a lab, and another group of teachers had another lab, and they didn't ever show up in the lab, and the students weren't very happy, so they started leaving the door open and stealing the equipment and stuff. But it didn't happen in my lab because the students felt happy. It was a good culture. They hang out there, they fixed computers there, they brought their friends there to play video games, and they just felt like it was a good place, and they owned it. And so they just had a culture where they took care of it. This is what happens at companies. You've got companies where people are happy and they like their job and they are proud of their company, and it's much better than a company where everybody is miserable and stabbing each other in the back and stealing the resources and such. So you've got steps to create a favorable security culture. You should involve people in discussions. Instead of feeling like there's a bunch of rules that just ruin your life, they should understand what we're trying to do and how these rules help them. The executive leadership has to follow by example. I know some top executive in the UK government was just fired because they set a strict quarantine lockdown for the coronavirus, and he snuck off to drive off and visit his girlfriend a couple of times and got caught. And they said, you can't be setting a bad example. That is intolerable. So you include security factors in the compensation. You make sure that all the messages are clear. This is what has all spectacularly failed in America. I mean, if we had a competent government during this coronavirus, the government would have, here's what we have to do. Issue a mandate. Everybody in the government obeys it. You never see the president without him wearing a mask. You always make sure that all the people at all the levels tell everybody what to do. So here's when we should open the schools. Here's exactly how everybody would know. It would be reinforced. Then you all get on board and you all do it. That's how you solve a big problem. But without that, you just have America's the world's greatest example of this, just a bunch of random people doing random things, and you can't solve a big problem that way. So you have various levels of governance, from policies down to compliance, guidelines and standards. You have an architecture, which is the setup of your technological stuff. So you try to align things correctly and try to organize them so that you can have efficiency and low cost. And you have resilience, so hopefully it can handle problems that come up. Scalable is a big buzzword these days. Scalable means this process can expand to handle more of whatever you have, more computers, more customers, more products. Things that are not scalable create a big problem at your company, because if your company is successful, it will grow in every way. And if you have a good process, it scales up to more. Otherwise, you have to revise your process as you get bigger. So the Zachman Framework from the 80s is still the dominant architecture standard. It is not a security standard, but it is a standard for architecture. So you have scope, various parts of it. You have data, the network, the people, time and strategy, and you have various models. It's just a way to specify all the pieces of the technology in your company so you can now assess whether you're handling them all correctly. Another technique people use is a data flow diagram, where they have a list of data all over the place and they watch where it's going. This is why one of the first things in compliance is one of the first questions you'll ask is, okay, so what is the data you value? You might have, I see a question, is scalability elasticity? It's a good question, and I don't know if I have a very brilliant answer. Scalability is letting things get bigger. Elasticity, I suppose, is the more general, adapting to changes. which might include other things than growth. But I haven't heard of a technical definition to be sure that's right. But that's, I think, what people mean. But these terms are a little bit vague. So one of the questions you'll ask when you try to achieve compliance is, what do you have that you value? So say we're Facebook, we have a database of all the customers' passwords and names and their real names. So that's something we want to protect. So the next question is, where is that data? What server is it on? How many copies are there of that data? Are there backup tapes? Are there other servers? Are people just taking it home on the floppy drives and putting it in external services like Gmail? And it turns out, when you first receive compliance, you typically have no idea where your data is. How many copies of it? Where are they? That's the first thing. Where is it all? Have you controlled that in some way? If you haven't, then you're not going to get very far. So you have all these sources of data that matter to your company, and then ways they flow into your systems and enter your storage systems and are used by people. And so one thing you have to do is make a data flow diagram. How does data flow? Where is it? Where does it go? And then you can start talking about what risks and controls are appropriate to handle this. Emergence is the fact that everything is constantly changing. People are having new technologies, new products, and that can make you more efficient and up to date, but of course it can cause inconsistent results and security risks. And then you've got enabling and support. This is the communication. It's huge because this big issue, probably number one issue all my students face and me, is that the technical people have something important to say and the management people cannot understand them, because they're not technical, and it is difficult for the management thinks they're telling you what to do and you're disobeying them. You think you're telling them an important thing and they're ignoring you. This is a huge problem in this business. And that's what certifications like this are supposed to fix. You're supposed to have people who understand some technology and some management so they can hopefully bridge this gap. So here's the enabling and support lifecycle. You have business requirements, you have service requirements, you have a solution, then a technology selection, then you deploy the solution, and these things all interact and go around in circles as you improve them. You've got human factors, of course, how the people interact with technology. And this is things like consistency with other systems and all the sound and ergonomics and so on. I'm just amazed at how Microsoft makes record profits, and they're such a spectacular failure at this. Every time Microsoft puts out a new version of stuff, they just move everything around, take half the items away, and you spend your life hunting for where they hid everything this time. It's spectacularly bad user experience, and yet they make record profits. So here's some examples. For example, you might have a new policy. For example, you might declare that from now on, nobody can get email on their personal iPhones anymore. So if you do that, that's your organization making a governing decision that affects the process, but that's going to foul up things. People are going to find they can't ask questions of the help desk anymore on their iPhone and so on. You'll have unexpected effects. Here's another one. So you have an outside security audit because you're doing something like compliance. And if you have PCI compliance and you have a lot of transactions, you have to be audited by an external agency every year. So somebody audits you and they find that you have servers that don't have the patches on them, like happened to Equifax. They didn't have the patches, so they got hacked. So now they say, why did that happen? We have a vulnerability scanner which checks for that, but somehow our process has failed. So now this chart can help you hunt for reasons. Perhaps it's a technological failure. Perhaps the scanner is not working right. Perhaps it is an architectural failure where your network is somehow broken in segments and the scanner can't reach all the systems. Perhaps it's a human problem where your engineers don't know how to properly use the scanner. Perhaps it is a process problem where, since the technological people aren't informed of what other people are doing, they have added new networks and not told the IT department, because it's effectively shadow IT, and they didn't know they had to update the scanner, so the scanner is not scanning those devices. This is why this kind of thinking can help you organize your decisions. All right, so we got another set of Kahoots. I see we're just in the hour, which is right on time. So this is 2A3, I think. Yeah. All right. I see. Taking the names, I'm fixing that. All right, good. Okay, so we got 6 people. I think that's it. Good. All right. All right. So which metric includes time to detect incidents? Yeah, that's a performance metric. That's a measure of how well you're performing, and if you had a shorter time, you'd be performing better. All right, which one is not one of the 4 perspectives in the balanced scorecard? Security is not one of them. Let me bring it up here. The balanced scorecard is back here. Yep, there's the balanced scorecard. Financial, customer, internal processes, and innovation and learning. Security is not at that level of importance at a company. It's more another issue. Anyway, that's there's that one. Actually, people are doing poorly in the cards, but I'm not surprised. I did too at first. This part is a little hard for me to get from a technical perspective, but I'm getting used to it. All right, so the BMIS model has 4 elements: people, process, technology, and. Organization. All right. Good. And what's the connection between organization and people? That's culture. Good. Everyone got that? All right. So, BH. Good. And Saul. Okay. Which I think is a real name. And I see BMIS wins, and he told me who he is. Good. All right. So I got the scores. All right. So what I'm going to do is take a 10-minute break. Might be a 15-minute break, long enough to process this video, and then I'll come back and talk about the political side of this. So I'm going to stop this recording.